Yuki stood there frozen in fear, thinking she was going to be killed by the demon standing before her. "Cory, run!" her mother shouted as she grabbed her Nichiren blades off the wall. Yuki was confused why her mother would call her Cory, but shouted back, "But, Mom, you'll die if you fight him!" "I know I will, but not without a fight. Get the other Hashira. Tell them to protect Yuki at all costs," she yelled, her voice shaking from the fear she was now feeling. "We can't let Muzan put his filthy hands on her." Muzan. Why did that name sound so familiar? Yuki ran to her room, shutting the door and opening the window, making it look like she had escaped. She made sure all of the books were still in the hidden compartment, but as she closed it again, a certain book caught her attention. The book's spine had the name Muzan Kibutsuji written on it. She opened it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the illustration of the man in question. That man inside her home looked identical to the man in the photo. She continued to read, and there was a certain passage that made her body shudder. Muzan Kibutsuji is the lord of all demons. He is rumored to be over 1,000 years old. Yuki's hands were shaking from the fear she felt, but put the book back on the shelf where she had grabbed it from. She listened outside, hearing the intense fight between Muzan and her mother. She opened the door to her closet, tucking herself into it as far as she could to keep herself hidden. Yuki's mother took in many deep breaths, trying to fill her lungs as best she could with her newfound injuries. Muzan looked down at her, pulling her blades out of her hands, throwing them to the floor. He grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground and making her look him in the eye. "You've put up quite the fight, but you knew you were no match against me. Your daughter will tell me everything she knows about the blue spider lily, whether she likes it or not." As he finished, he started squeezing her neck as tight as he could. He watched as she struggled against his grip, the life in her eyes draining. He smiled, the grin full of malice as he squeezed with full force, severing her head from the rest of her body. Her blood splattered, crimson rain now filling the room. He dropped the corpse he had been holding, stepping over it as he walked towards the bedroom he had seen Yuki enter. He burst the door down, pieces of it scattering across the pristine floorboards. He looked around, seeing the room lined with bookcases. He looked up, seeing that the window was open, but judging by there not being anything on the ground, he knew she hadn't escaped and was still in the room somewhere. He pulled one of the books from the bookcase, skimming through it quickly, but finding nothing of interest. He kept pulling more and more, but he couldn't find what he was looking for in any of the books. He threw them to the ground, scattering pages across the rubble. He listened for any sign of life in the bedroom, staying completely silent, but believed to not hear anything, but could hear a quiet heartbeat from somewhere in the room. "I can hear your heartbeat, Demon Slayer," he said, malice laced in his tone. "Come out of your hiding spot, and maybe I'll spare you the agony of getting ripped into tiny ribbons." He prowled around the room, not hearing any movement from anywhere inside. He sighed before walking to the back of the room, hiding in the corner. "I guess she's not in here." He used his power to make it seem like he had walked out of the room, going to search for her somewhere else. Yuki stayed in her hiding spot a little while longer, waiting to not hear his footsteps anymore. She opened up the closet, looking out to the broken-down door, before stepping out into the rubble. Her eyes widened in relief seeing he had left, and started walking towards the door to make a run for it. As she started making her way out, she felt an icy hand get rested on her shoulder, very close to her neck. Muzan leaned over, his warm breath close to her ear, but the words he said sent a frozen chill down her spine. "Found you." Yuki slowly turned around, her eyes filled with pure terror as she locked eyes with Muzan. She felt her heart begin to race and felt her body begin to tremble. She tried to pull away, but she felt his grip on her shoulder tighten. He pulled her back towards him and made her face him, meeting his glowing gaze. "Where do you think you're going, Slayer? I have you right where I need you. To think you didn't have the courage to face me. What a pathetic excuse for a hushery you are." His words cut Yuki like a knife, even though she knew they were directed towards Corey. She struggled against his grasp, trying her hardest to get away. "Let go of me! I don't have what you want!" "I know you don't, but you're my key to getting it. Once your sister returns, she'll have no choice but to give up that information." "She'll never tell you! You must be a fool if you think she will!" "That's enough from you," he shouted, picking Yuki up by the throat and throwing her through the wall. She rolled across the floor of her home, broken pieces of furniture scratching up her face. She tried picking herself off the floor, but she coughed up a lot of blood. The impact must have broken a rib and punctured a lung. She looked up, meeting the lifeless gaze of her mother's severed head. She screamed loudly as tears started to pour down her face. She looked back up to see Muzan walking through the broken-down doorway of her bedroom, and her eyes widened in pure fear. His footsteps echoed louder and louder as he walked closer, and she started screaming. "Please, stay away from me!" Her voice was breaking from the pure amount of fear she felt. Muzan ignored her plea, now standing directly above her. He kicked her in the stomach, making her collapse to the ground once more. She coughed up more blood, but didn't notice Muzan pick up her mother's sword. She began to pick herself up, but let out a blood-curdling scream when she felt the sharp pain of the sword being stabbed through her shoulder. Blood trailed down her face from her lips, the rest of her body in excruciating pain from the injuries. She weakly looked up, meeting Muzan's gaze once more. He knelt down in front of her, lifting her head up by the chin to look deep into her eyes. "Your wounds aren't fatal, but you'll be in quite a bit of pain for the next few weeks," he whispered, chuckling afterwards. "All we do now is wait for your sister to return." "Yuki?" a shaky voice asked from the open doorway. Muzan looked back at the girl. He looked at her attire, and his blood immediately began to boil. She was in a Demon Slayer uniform, and held 2 Nichiren blades in her hands. "You," he muttered, his voice having a growl behind it. "You both tricked me," he shouted, looking down at Yuki and her dead mother. Yuki's vision had begun to blur from the pain she had been enduring, and she could feel her eyelids growing incredibly heavy. "Corey," she muttered, feeling her body going limp as her eyes fluttered closed, as she lost consciousness from the pain. Corey stared at Muzan, her eyes filled with a mix of fury and sadness. She charged towards him, attacking while shouting, "What the hell did you do to my family?" Muzan easily dodged her attacks, grabbing both of her wrists and disarming her. He pushed her against the wall and cornered her. "That's enough. If you don't want me to kill your sister right here and now, you'll listen to every word I'm about to tell you, Corey." She's not dead?" she questioned, her voice cracking as she pushed back her tears. "She's very much alive, but her life is fading quickly. I can save her and make sure she lives. For a price." "What kind of price?" Corey asked, worry lacing her tone as she looked at her unconscious sister. "I think you already know what price you'd have to pay." He laughed sinisterly as he brushed his hands against Corey's neck, lightly grazing the skin. "No. You want me to become a demon, she squeaked, having the sudden realization.
That would be correct, Corey,
he said, picking up one of her swords and placing the tip of it on the back of Yuki's neck.
If you agree to become a demon, I will save Yuki's life and let her live. But deny my offer, and I'll kill her right now and make sure your own death is slow and painful.
Corey stood there frozen in fear, her body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She looked down at her sister, watching as more and more blood spilled from her wounds, but Muzan's words snapped her out of her thoughts.
Time is ticking away, Corey. Will you save your sister and serve under me, or will your death be more agonizing than you could ever imagine?